What are your guys' worst worst moments, worst things from 2017?
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down. I added Charlottesville to the list because that
Mhm.
seemed like
Yeah.
a pretty big inflection point where it's like, okay, so our president is going to come out and say that neo-Nazis are very fine people.
Mhm.
All right, cool.
Both sides.
Yeah, both sides. Now we know where you stand, as if we had any doubt.
It's gross.
Yeah.
I think the Gorsuch confirmation is, it's a holdover from the bad parts of 2016, but it's like the GOP, of course, they didn't make any effort to, give us a moderate, but didn't even try to say, yes, we stole this Supreme Court seat from you. Maybe we'll, make it a decent pick. No, we're just going to pick the most conservative guy we can find.
Yeah, that infuriates me every single time I think about it because it was so, I mean, that is such an anti-democratic move. That is a really unconstitutional move. And they got away with it. And it's just galling.
Yep.
It's really galling.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that we don't really have the mechanisms did not work in that case. Like
Right.
It's supposed to be a certain way, and it allows you to kind of play politics with it. And I think that is something that's so important.
And it's another case where they just banked on our complacency.
Mm-hmm.
And part of this, was Obama's complacency. He thought, all right, well, Clinton's going to win, and then we'll get somebody in then. And they didn't really make that big of a stink about it, and they didn't fight. And you can't take anything for granted, especially when you're dealing with Mitch McConnell and this current GOP.
Yeah, and a lot of it is that
For everything that the left didn't fight on the Supreme Court seat, that is how the right campaigned. That was part of the campaign for Trump,
Right.
was saying to evangelicals, there is a Supreme Court seat on the line right now. There will probably be more coming up, but there is one sitting there right now that you are voting on. So however much you might hate Trump, you want a conservative on the Supreme Court, you vote for Trump.
Yeah, and it didn't really, for the liberal side, it didn't really change the makeup. Because Scalia was so far right. I think that adds to the lack of urgency. And there's, also not a whole, it sucks, but like there's not a whole lot you can do. If Mitch McConnell's the gatekeeper of all the things, and if he won't do it, like I think that if that were to happen today, I think we would recognize what political pressure does. But I think at that point, we just thought, oh, well, GOP is corrupt and like we can't, what are we going to do? It's not up to us. But I think that like we realize now it is. And the decisions that are made at the top are more dependent on what we do than we thought they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never understood why that wasn't more of an issue during the campaign. And also just, an administration, that the president is not, just one figurehead, but they bring in an entire administration with them. And I really wish that Clinton had talked about that more during the campaign. Like, you think he's bad, but maybe not so bad. Think about the kind of people he's going to appoint in his cabinet.
Right.
I don't know why that doesn't come up as much during presidential campaigns. Like, this is an overhaul of the entire government. You want this guy appointing all those people?
Right. And the Department of Justice.
Yeah. And all the judicial nominees now.
There's a lot of terrible judicial nominees, and we are sort of ignoring that problem.
Yeah.
And part of it is that we really can't do anything until we get a majority. Like we can do something about it after we take back the House, like both chambers.
But we should make that an issue that we run on in all the Senate campaigns in 2018. Yeah. Like, if you want to put a stop to all these horrible nominations, this is the only way to do it. And I just keep hearing people like, oh, well, we don't want to run on impeachment, or we don't want to run on opposition. And but why not?
Yeah, I don't know.
You mentioned all the terrible people that he's nominating in the cabinet, or nominated and were confirmed somehow in the cabinet. Those are also on my terrible list of things that happened in 2017. Betsy DeVos is near the top of that list.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's trying to use her position to ruin public schools completely.
Agreed.
And Scott Pruitt is way up on the top of that list.
I always go, and that, like, I think one of the things that bothered me about Betsy DeVos, the fight against Betsy DeVos, not that I don't think she's terrible, not that I don't think she's way not qualified. I was concerned about the way that she was targeted. She's literally the only female member of the cabinet. And the fact that, like...
Oh, you forgot Elaine Chao.
Elaine Chao, yes. Oh, Elaine Chao. That, like, and it probably had a lot to do with the fact that she is dealing with, Secretary of Education. Women were very active during that time, and so she became the target. It did bother me that, like, out of the one nominee that got the closest to not being confirmed was the woman, and it seemed like insult. There were more people piling on her than, like, the guy that wanted to dismantle the very agency that is going to protect the environment, and he had sued to, like, there was a incongruent kind of thing happening.
Yeah.
And it was just something, not that I think it wasn't warranted. It was just an interesting kind of targeting. And she was so close, and that she was the one that was so close.
Yeah, she was so close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like they're all terrible, but who is going to have the farthest reaching effects?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. For me, like, Sessions was my biggest fear, and he has been as bad as I feared he would be. And the only good thing is that he recused himself from the Russia thing, but everything else he's doing on, on justice and civil rights and all of that is really, really disturbing. And so I thought it was curious that Betsy DeVos seemed to engender the most opposition.
Yeah.
Because Pruitt, Sessions, they're all so
Rex Tillerson,
I know, exactly.
Our entire diplomatic strategy in State Department. And it was just like, kind of like, we don't like him, and he did this, but not this kind of very targeted. It was, just an interesting point. Take it as you will.
Yeah.
Agreed. No, Scott Pruitt is terrible. I think part of it maybe, I mean, I agree with you that there's some clear sexism going on there. I think part of it too, though, is our ease of understanding what these people do. Like, we see schools.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
We see the difference between, people understand that there are public schools and charter schools, and maybe they don't understand all the ins and outs and where the money goes to, and actually a lot more of it's controlled at the state level and the local level. But, they sort of know what schools are. You ask somebody what the EPA does, and they might not know or care as much as they really should. And EPA is maybe easier to understand than something like Department of the Interior. I don't know what that person does.
Right.
He flies planes around a lot, apparently, So I think part of the reasoning behind the targeting is just because it's so easy to understand how she could hurt things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Megan and I went to this campaign training a couple weeks ago that Working Families Party put on, and they talked about, when you're trying to persuade people, you look for what their self-interest is. And I think this is a case where people's self-interest was a lot easier to define and identify.
That was,
Which I think was also the case with like the ACA fight versus the tax fight. Like the tax fight is a harder thing to encapsulate into where your self-interest lies. So it's like, I think it's our job as progressives to try and encapsulate what the self-interest is on all these different issues.
Yeah, the tax fight, of course, the tax scam is one of the lowlights of 2017, happening right at the end of the year. I mean, the positive on it, hopefully, is that it's so terribly unpopular. And, maybe it will, maybe it being so unpopular will make Trump and the Republicans even more unpopular than they are now.
That's my hope.
Yeah, the fact that he's like, oh, you're so rich now. Like, it was so obviously directed at certain population when you drop the corporate tax by 15%, like almost in half, and then cut all of these. I guess the PAYGO waivers went through, which is in a whole other thing. But with like Bob Corker switching his vote for no fucking reason at all, like nothing changed. I think that it was so blatantly obvious a corporate rich people tax break,
right?
And people switched their votes for no reason. I just think that it was.
I was just reflecting the other day how during the 2012 campaign, Mitt Romney's 47% comment is what's generally assumed to have sunk him. But Trump can go to Mar-a-Lago and say, you all just got a whole lot richer. And, they better fucking put that in every campaign ad for the next 4 years, because that is.
Someone needs to be recording him all.
I know, that's orders of magnitude worse than the 47% comment.
But he says so much.
That's
part
the
of
thing.
It, I don't understand the world anymore.
I know, like, I would be happy with Mitt Romney right now.
Oh, yeah.
Getting back to that, Mitt Romney seems like friggin'.
Mitt Romney and his binders full of women.
Binders full of women.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the other thing he said. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my
God.
God.
This is a terribly depressing conversation, Kelly.
I know.
So let's end on a hopeful note. How can we wrap this up in a hopeful way?
All right. So before we move on for bad things, let me just list some more terrible things that I don't want people to forget about. CHIP funding expiring and not being renewed was just the most
It was,
despicable
though.
thing.
They're funded through
Temporarily.
March.
There's a temporary, but it's not. It hasn't really been restored.
Right.
No Clean Dream Act yet, and it's terrible. Like, people don't know what their status is. They don't know what their status is going to be in a month when Congress gets back.
Like kids.
Yeah, can you
They're gonna
imagine
be, like,
being
deported.
in that limbo?
Yeah.
And here's something I was thinking. Like, on the one hand, they're saying, well, we can't afford CHIP, which is bullshit. But let's say that there's some veracity to that premise. Okay, well, then if you would let the Dreamers stay, their tax revenue would probably pay for CHIP. Done. Boom.
Or you could just lower the tax rate to 22% for corporations and save $1 trillion and use that.
Or that.
Yeah.
But since CHIP and the DREAM Act seem to be bundled together, let's see how they actually could interlock in a positive way.
Other terrible things. Let's see. Well, the travel bans were terrible, but keep being overturned. So we'll see what's happening with that. Speaking of people being in limbo, are you allowed in the country? I don't know. Maybe tomorrow.
Right?
As someone
Right.
who works in graduate admissions with international student populations, this has all been very. It's not good for the economy when people feel like they shouldn't count on being able to go to the school in the U.S. Let's just say.
Yeah, and don't international students pretty much pay the way for all the financial aid that domestic students get?
Yeah, I mean that's more on the undergrad level, but yeah, absolutely. We're not going to be doing well in higher education if we suddenly don't have international students. That's for sure.
No, yeah, it's really short-sighted.
And then perhaps the most terrible thing of all, I don't know, that's probably going too far. Our president baiting North Korea in tweets.
God.
I'm looking at our list and I can't believe I didn't even put that on the list. But yeah.
Rocket Man.
Yeah, little Rocket Man.
I think that actually that's obviously fucking scary. But the display at the UN this past week with Nikki Haley has been the scariest thing I've ever witnessed. Like when you were yelling at the UN and saying we'll remember your vote and that kind of shit. Like the way that our NATO allies are being kind of put into wars start through miscommunication, and someone just the very threat that someone might not come to your aid is enough for people to stop trusting you, and I worry about that.
Yeah.
And how that affects Russia, how Russia's affecting North Korea, how they're banding together because we are alienating our NATO allies, which has basically kept the world safe since 1947. It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's where my mind goes whenever he starts threatening anything.
Diplomacy and foreign policy in tatters.
And
nobody at the wheel.
Right, I would absolutely. If I were France, if I were Canada, and my allies started threatening North Korea, I would be you're on your fucking own. I would be we're not coming to your aid. That it's only I think it's also Article 5. Article 5 comes a lot. But in NATO, it's the one that was triggered after September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
And that could if we're no, we're baiting Rocket Man. We're not gonna go blow shit up for you.
Right.
When we don't know if you'll do it for us. We know you won't do it for us. That's Putin's fucking dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why all this is happening.
Well done, comrade.
Right. So that's scares the bejesus out of me.
Yes, agreed. All right, so let's end on a hopeful note. Where the fuck do we go from here?
My personal thing is vote. Register to vote. Yeah. Get everybody registered. Get everybody's ducks in a row. Drive people to the polls. Vote.
Yep. Yeah, the same with me. I think that anyone who has an extra dollar, who has an extra hour, the more we can convince people that their vote matters and that they have power, and to get people to show up with their representatives, make them less cynical, show them how to be less cynical, and then everyone kind of turning in a little bit of their piece of themselves and recognize that it's up to us and get out there and fight like hell.
Yeah. So I just gave money today to Let America Vote. It was one of my holiday gifts to some of my family members was a donation to Let America Vote. That's one organization you can get behind. There are plenty
Swing
others.
Left, Flippable. They're doing great stuff.
Mm-hmm. Sister District.
Yep, Sister District. And individual candidates, especially women of color.
Yeah.
I think $5 goes a long way in a state legislature. And then they don't, the DNC, that's more money they don't have to raise from big donors that everyone seems to hate.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. too. Definitely registering people to vote, I think, is going to be hugely important. Getting people to the polls and doing whatever we can to either change voter ID laws, or if voter ID laws continue to exist, then you help people get IDs, wherever you can.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you can do in that regard, I think is going to be hopeful. And then I think that whatever we can